Poker Night at the Inventory is one of the most surreal, chilling, and unique video games I ever played in my life. Back in the early ancient year of 2009 AD, Telltale Games were surprisingly on top of their game, something nobody saw coming after the creation of the studio was caused by Kevin Bruner, Troy Molander, and the legendary Dan Const's disapproval of LucasArts, at the time, cancellation of every point-and-click adventure game project, including the now infamous Sam Max Freelance Police. Despite them being something of a makeshift indie company, they were somehow able to achieve a loving audience, a bunch of decent sales numbers, multiple awards for the greatest video game achievements of the year, such as Best Voice Acting or Best Adventure Game, and an overall amazing library of beloved adventure games. The Sam Max trilogy are video game masterpieces. Strong Bad School Game is one of the best licensed games of all time. Tales of Monkey Island was the best post-Ron Gilbert sequel of the series, and as for the lesser-known ones like the Bone Duology or the Wallace and Gromit game, they were also neat little games, acting more so as a side dish next to the main courses. Telltale was able to start from zero, and eventually were able to create a cult following of their own, thanks to the franchises they were able to own to make games from. However, this sparked an interesting question about Telltale and the many games they made over the franchises they were able to get licenses from. What if all of those characters that solidified Telltale as a near-perfect point-and-click game company were to interact with each other? You see, despite Telltale being at the time known for games you'd sit down to play for their intricate story, likable characters, never-before-seen visuals, great music, and surprisingly deep gameplay, Telltale's first ever game was not an adventure game at all. This is Telltale's Texas Hold'em, the first ever game they made in the Telltale tool on February 11th, 2005, almost 20 years ago. With all of gaming's most beloved developers' first games, all of them seem to be something tiny and not quite groundbreaking compared to the titles that would yet to come, and Telltale Games was no exception to this criteria. TTG Hold'em is a virtual poker simulator, where you and 4 other characters, Harry, Boris, Theodore, and Grandma, compete against each other in a simple, run-of-the-mill match of Texas Hold'em. That is it. When the Wikipedia page only has a small amount of things to say, so do I. Nowadays, this game is seen as a relic of the past. Before PC games were required to be on online platforms like Steam to even have a chance at selling, before when games were stuck on 4:3 aspect ratios, the times of minimalist UIs, stock sound effects, and other dated stuff I could ramble on about in this video. With every Telltale game, there's something to talk about. Each and every one of their games is special, but for TTG Texas Hold'em, all you can really talk about this game that is considered interesting is the fact that Boris Skrinkle would go on to cameo in the Telltale Sam Max trilogy as the iconic Leonard Stirkshammer from Sam Max 103. I will give the game a bit of credit though. For a simple yet boring relic it is, there are a few things I like about it that made me remember why I loved Telltale as a game developing company in the first place. The over-the-top, cartoonish-looking humans are always one of the most charming things about Telltale. Way before they were able to make realistic-looking human characters, they'd always have the ones that looked off-model and odd, yet memorable and likable at the same time. The main theme of the game fits well into the low-budgety nature of the game itself, and would go on to be a precursor to what kind of music tracks the legendary Jared Emerson Johnson would go on to compose in games like Sam Max 2 and Tales of Monkey Island. And most importantly, somewhat normal, yet quite mean-spirited writing is yet another staple that makes a lot of Telltale's more experimental games memorable and possibly even timeless.
This is the moment you've all been waiting for. I'm all in.
I'm not sure, but I think I just had a heart attack.
However, aside from the things I enjoyed about this game, it is still nothing but a tech demo for the Telltale tool, and not a really impressive one at that. The game really didn't catch a lot of attention when it came out, however it did in fact get an award for Indie Game of the Month from the iconic video game journalist company PC Zone, back in June 2005. Afterwards, Telltale released the Bone Duology and the first of their CSI games in late 2005 and early 2006 respectively, and after the release of their first ever masterpiece we all know and love nowadays, Sam Max Save the World, Telltale Texas Hold'em drowned in obscurity. On May 15th, 2009, Telltale Games started a survey which was meant to see what fans would want from a sequel to Telltale Texas Hold'em. Really? They're asking if the fans want a sequel to that game? What in the world could they add to what was basically a show-off presentation of what kind of style of creativity and what kind of games Telltale were able to make in their dedicated engine? Whatever kind of interesting stuff could be made with simple two-dimensional characters from the original game? Is there anyone that wouldn't have bought a sequel to the game if it didn't have the iconic character of Grandma? Out of all series Telltale was able to own and make games from, why were they wondering if their fanbase wanted a second Texas Hold'em game? Besides, why were they also asking fans what they want to see in a brand new project, when this was around the time Telltale was still releasing episodes for Wallace and Gromit, and were in the early production of Tales of Monkey Island? Why would they want to make another poker simulator rather than something like, for example, a third Bone game or maybe a second season to Strong Bad's game? Why would they want to use a fragment of their resources spent into another simple tech demo instead of something never before seen from them? All of these questions that we're asking ourselves could seem like we're just asking the same thing over and over, but the sentiment remains true. People don't want another poker game from Telltale. However, what they haven't known was, Telltale wasn't as gullible with their ideas as they thought they would be. You see, around the offices of Telltale in 2009, employees were having many different creative ideas created from the depths of their minds while designing, writing, just doing their jobs while helping to make the games they'd sell. Many ideas would go on to be featured in the games, and a lot of them felt like an afterthought, something that seemed creative, interesting and unique, but definitely not fit for whatever kind of games they would be working on back in 2009. One of these ideas was actually imagined by the legend himself, Dan Connors. This idea being something that, while seemingly simple at first, wasn't actually done by any other company at the time. Texas Hold'em 2 grew out of an idea from us wondering what video game characters do when they're not on the clock in the games we play. We now come back to the important question I asked earlier. What if there was a Telltale game where the characters we know and love interacted with each other? That was the genius idea Telltale were going to make for the next poker simulator they were making at the time. However, there needed to be a few rules and things to remember when it came to picking which characters were going to star in this grand crossover. From there, we pitched the idea to other companies in the industry and were able to work out which characters we would be able to include. We considered how the 4 characters would interact with each other, developing dialogue, banter, and reactions to certain plays. The characters would be fully voiced, and would have distinctive tells and dynamic responses that would manifest themselves as the game progressed. Our goal was to create the experience of hanging out with virtual buddies, shooting the breeze, and playing a good game of poker. And with that quote from Connors, things were set in stone for the next sleeper hit Telltale were going to make in 2010.
May the best player win. Well, that was a quivering pile of not fun.
Of course you do.
I raise.
Fold.
I'm folding these. Is the card beast of the worst poker nightmare.
Poker Night: The Inventory is a poker video game developed by Telltale Games. It features 4 characters from different franchises: Tycho Bray from Penny Arcade, Max from Sam & Max, the Red Heavy Weapons Guy from Team Fortress 2, and Strongbad from Homestar Runner. The game was released on November 22nd, 2010, with real positive reception by both casual gamers and Telltale fans alike. The game was set in a secret cove called The Inventory, built hidden under a video game storage warehouse, and was established in 1990 after a first draft of the 18th Amendment was acquired by a group of connected gamblers. It was discovered that it can not only outlaw libations, but games and amusements that could decrease the productivity of the national workforce. Despite this never coming to pass, the club has existed since in secret, just in case Congress tried to set prohibition into law. So the only next logical step for the club is to invite only the most classy and deserving video game characters enough to enjoy and bask in the glory of the secret club. However, your protagonist, known as the player, just so happened to be lucky enough for him to be invited by the current dealer of tonight's game, Captain Winslow from Tales of Monkey Island. Quite a guy he is.
How good it is to see a fresh face here at the Inventory.
The main attraction of the game, which would go on to be the most important aspect of the series, are the crossover characters you yourself are facing, and for Poker Night 1, the cast they chose was literally iconic. First, you have Max from the Sam & Max series, which by now is a character who needs no introduction.
You need anybody roughed up?
There's a bird at the pet store that's been giving me a little beak, yeah.
Oh, putting a wiseacre in his place is my specialty!
We all know and love this 3-foot-tall, hyperconnected, violent, and hilarious Rabbity thing as an unofficial mascot for Telltale and for being the character based on one of the most iconic hats in Team Fortress 2. And speaking of TF2, we've got the Heavy Weapons Guy, arguably one of the most charming FPS characters ever.
Tetris's baby game.
You ever play Tetris Attack? That game keeps it hood.
Back in 2010, before TF2 had all the updates that featured the many items and aspects we associate with the character that made him so iconic, Heavy himself felt like a somewhat simple character. However, in Poker Night 1, we found out more about Heavy's personality and the way he acts outside of battle, being portrayed as a somewhat cheerful yet wise big man who just likes winning in poker, his gun Sasha, and especially committing manslaughter. Next up, we have everyone's favorite 2000s internet icon, Sean Bad from Homestar Runner, or in this case, his own Telltale game, Sean Bad's Cool Game for Attractive People. In case a few of you don't know, Sean Bad is an email-checking wrestleman, fully equipped with a high ego and a need to prank and bully people around him that feel strange for his presence. He's over the top, likes the most obvious awesome stuff such as cold ones, beers, video games, and comically dumb-looking weapons. His character is more of the lines of an anti-hero, very prickish and rude yet likable and iconic. I mean, if this guy can become an icon of early days of the internet and star in one of the best games of all time, he would also deserve a spot in a poker round with people he easily views as moronish.
What's No Loser Candyland?
I don't know, loser.
And finally, we have Tycho Brahe from the quite niche Penny Arcade webcomics. While definitely not the best character in the game, Tycho himself is the most interesting, because he's the only character in this roster you might not recognize. In case his character doesn't ring a bell, Tycho Brahe is the self-insert parody of the character of the co-creator of the Penny Arcade comics, Jerry Hawkins, who works alongside the other co-creator, Mike Krahulik. And if those names still don't ring a bell, they're actually the creators and founders of the gaming convention Penny Arcade Expo, aka PAX, and the Child's Play charity. Anyways, Tycho as a character is very unique to Poker Night 1, being the only character not originating from a video game, the only character who got his first voice acting role in this game specifically, voiced by Andrew Chaikin, and the only character who needed to receive a 3D model from scratch. And honestly, Telltale did an amazing job transitioning him from the comics to the game.
I am hungry for sandwich.
So order a sandwich, man. Your stomach sounds like a sarlacc or some.
He acts a bit more differently than anyone else, being the only character who willingly uses profanity and swear words. His personality can be described as a guy who is chill when nobody is around, but with a group of people, acts like the most elegant, self-confident prank to everyone else. And the way they wrote him was really accurate to the source material, from the quotes of geeky video game franchises to his unexpected harsh comments, and especially through his remarks about his intimate thoughts.
You can tell me. I'll put it in the vault.
The characters themselves are all great and memorable, and it's even better when you pair them together. The biggest thing that the Telltale writers wanted to do with these characters is to show off how they interacted with different characters and what kind of things they'll say. All of our lovable members just seem to have unique dynamics to everyone. For an example, Max is much more relaxed with the characters on the table of the inventory and just shows off more of his friendly and silly moments rather than him being the harsh joke machine he was in the trilogy of his games. Sean Bad acts exactly like he would from the cartoons, not being able to trust anyone from the cast, and whenever he's winning, always takes a chance to mock them and rub it in their face. Heavy is more on the accepting side, always appreciating the good aspects of the people he is with, such as finding Max funny, Sean Bad reminding him fondly of his teammates of the Red Team, and despite having a few gripes with Tycho, enjoys to dabble into the conversation he starts with Heavy. And as for Tycho, he gets along with Max because both of them are comic characters, always bashes on Sean Bad for being prickish to everyone, and enjoys starting conversations with Heavy, even if they result in him risking his life for pissing Heavy off. They don't only have dynamics between themselves, but also interact with you, the player. Since you as a player are a newcomer to the inventory, the cast don't hold their punches back when it comes to mocking you for your skills.
You're just gonna fold? But now I can't guilt you into overbetting bad cards by putting on my cute rabbit face.
Wow, impressive folding, something face. Can I get you to fold my laundry?
No shame in fold.
I wouldn't classify folding as baller behavior.
The crossover characters and their relationships and dynamics between themselves and the player were beloved by players of Poker Night 1. If you didn't know a majority of the cast appearing in the game, you'd enjoy learning what they're like and all the many quotes and things they like to express themselves about on the table. And if you do know all of the characters and what they're from, you'll absolutely love all the references and callbacks they make to their own franchises.
Seeing all these aces reminds me of this dream I had where I could use a playing card to read people's minds.
Hey, Heavyman, you think you could take care of the king of town for me?
You are heavy, tiny, no? You are red team. You have killing gloves of boxing. You earn these for being great killer.
I've got a motorcycle helmet that gives me 100% defense against flesh-searing UV rays.
The characters' writing isn't the only thing special about this game. The way they play is also really advanced for 2010. Max plays regularly, Strong Bad plays aggressively and will usually go all in the most, Heavy plays a bit predictably and will usually resort to doing the same moves on the opponents he's up against, and Tycho plays more defensively, meaning that he'll fold the most, and whenever he's betting or going all in, means he's really confident in his cards and there might be a big chance for him to win a hand. Another cool character-driven dynamic are the indications that the characters can see when they're looking at their cards, something the game likes to call tells. They happen on some occasions and can range from noticeable to very subtle, but if you notice them, you might have a higher chance of making a correct move. For example, if Max keeps checking his cards, he has a bad hand. If Strong Bad bangs his head off the table, he has an obviously awful hand. If Heavy adjusts his ammo belt, he might have a good chance. And on the rarest occasion, if Tycho grins with the red eyes, you're screwed. Now, whenever they do these tells, it isn't a 100% guarantee that everything will be set in stone. Just be sure to take notice of them in case you're not sure if your own hand is good. All of these different features in the game that deepen the characters are something never before seen in Telltale games, and heck, something we never really saw in any game ever. An assortment of fun, known characters with their personalities complementing the gameplay with the way they think, the way they play, and the way they look. All fully packed with a fanservice load worth of content such as unlockable decks and tables, all with cool art of the series is featured, and many different changes and filters that the tables add. It also has its well-beloved soundtrack, composed by the legendary Jared Emerson Johnson. The songs featured are jazzy, classy, and more 60s sounding rendition of the music from the franchises featured, such as the Skunk Ape theme, Morgun, Dangeresque, and many others. If we are talking about bonus features for the completionists who want to unlock 100% of the game's achievements, we can look out for the rare occasions for the characters offering a bind which you can unlock by knocking out the characters who currently possess the item. Max Rage his gun and badge, Strong Bad his Dangeresque glasses, Heavy his own Love Sasha, and Tycho his, and sometimes games, Pac-Man watch. Not only are these items a great addition if you're looking to 100%ing the game, but the best bit is that if you collect the achievements that you unlock by earning the items, you get these items as exclusive weapons and cosmetics in Team Fortress 2. These items are to this day one of the most beloved, sought out, and iconic in the entire game's history. As for the gameplay itself, it's pretty much the same thing you would expect in TTG Hold'em, but much more refined and is way more complemented by the world building, great character moments, and atmosphere. Seriously, the only real reason why I'd love to boot up Poker Night 1 on an almost daily basis is that it never gets old hearing the same conversations by characters like Tycho or Max. The atmosphere and music always seem to drag me in on how immersive they are, and the overall excitement of just winning a good hand, or an absolute hilarious misfortune of losing a showdown all in because the bad cards in the photo had somehow turned into a full house, is something that just screams, this game has almost infinite replay value. That's right, Poker Night is such a fun game, to the point where even failing and losing money like an idiot from the current balance tab is still fair and not as frustrating as one would think. This is why Poker Night 1 has lasted the test of time, and why it's still talked about by a few people after almost 14 years. The combination of a lovable and memorable interpretation of what our favorite characters do in their free time, the memorable identity of the setting itself, the unpredictably exciting poker gameplay, and the overall iconic status in this game gained in Telltale's history makes it to this day one of the best works they've done in the early years. Sure, it's still nowhere near the same quality of all the classic point-and-click games they've done, but for the sheer fact it turned a game that was nothing but a tech demo into a unique one-of-a-kind experience is something absolutely miraculous.
Beat me twice, also shame on me. Beat me 3 times, I am sent to my death.
After the game's release, many people really loved Poker Night 1, praising it for the many aspects I just mentioned right here. Because of that, Telltale were really glad of what they'd done with such a simple concept and turning it into something special. And just like what they did with Sam Max Save the World, if something one of a kind happens and people love it, a follow-up is sure to be inevitable. Poker Night 2 is a poker video game developed by Telltale Games. It is the sequel to Poker Night at the Inventory and, like its predecessor, features characters from different franchises, this time being Brock Sampson from Venture Bros, Claptrap from the Borderlands series, Ash Williams from Army of Darkness, and Sam from Sam Max's Devil's Playhouse. The game was released for PC, but for the first time in the series, also released on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 on April 24, 2013, with an iOS version released the following month on May 23rd. The game once again is set in the Inventory, where you, the player, get invited by Captain Winslow once again for a fun, high-stakes poker tournament with the newcomers of the Inventory, since the last time the player visited the place was quite different. This game is basically what you expect from the first game, but with a new coat of paint. You get to see new faces that you never expected to see, except maybe for Sam, playing a card game and making fun conversations with each other about what they like to do and what they're like. It isn't just the 4 characters interacting anymore though, because in Poker Night 2, for the first time ever in the series, we have a dealer character that is separate from the host of the poker game, and the character we're talking about is none other than GLaDOS from the Portal series.
Thanks for another crappy hand, lady.
You're welcome. It's nice to be appreciated.
In the game, you can now notice there are more animations, visual details, and many other things happening during the match. The tells are still here and still provide a good idea of what the opponent's hands currently are like. The reward system is still here like always, and the in-game skin systems have been refined, so that now you instead get points which you can spend on the skins you yourself want to use, instead of having to have a specific amount of wins to unlock them. All of this sounds well and good. A neat continuation of the first Poker Night game with new characters with redone gameplay aspects to bring something new into the series. These seems like something that'd be right up my alley, right? Well, unfortunately, no. I'm about to express one of my most unpopular Telltale Games opinions, and let me say, this is one of the only few very unpopular ones. Poker Night 2 is not as good as Poker Night 1. In fact, I'll even say this. Poker Night 2 isn't a great game. Not a bad game, no, I can still call it a good experience, but to call it a word associated with the same quality of the first game is just something I can't do. I have a lot of gripes with Poker Night 2 as both a game and a sequel, and what other place to start from than this? Poker Night 2 barely expands on the themes of the first game. You see, Poker Night 1's atmosphere is something we've pretty much not seen in Telltale games up to that point. A simple yet interesting story of how a secret club like this came to be, it just made things much more chill and kind of mysterious. When playing the first game, the only person you'd see during the match besides the cast and Captain Winslow was Flint Paper, who was just sitting there and minding his own business. Here though, on Poker Night 2, nothing majorly new was added, and instead, it felt like the mysterious vibe of the Inventory itself was just gone. Instead of going in a dark alleyway down a secret elevator, you instead arrive in a limousine with General Skankape of all people. And instead of just seeing a few cameo characters while passing by to go to the real tournament, instead, all the new characters and cameo characters just so happen to be in one exact place. The best example of other characters suddenly appearing during the match being the only non-Winslow mainstay character from Poker Night 1, it was Max, who just so happens to be there alongside Sam to watch and comment on the game. Now, I love Sam and Max. They're my favorite video game characters, nay, favorite characters in fiction ever. And I must say that they have a lot of funny conversations with each other in this game. And I also must mention that this is the first piece of Sam and Max video where David Boat voices Max, the person who is still holding the title of Max's voice to this day. With all of that being said, as much as I love the interaction Sam and Max have in this game, I feel as if it doesn't really complement how the series' atmosphere was once like. And to me, Poker Night 2 just feels like another quirky Telltale game setting, which in reality isn't all that bad, but compared to what we had in the first game, it's clear why a person like me is disappointed. However, just because the secret style that the Inventory was going for the first game isn't there present anymore, doesn't mean that it doesn't make the game much worse already, right? Yeah, you are in fact correct about it. However, with the many other flaws I get to list in a moment, you'll soon see why they and the problem with this sequel not expanding or doing anything new is something that I clearly didn't ignore. Poker Night 2's characters have no chemistry. Now earlier, I've been talking about a lot about the characters of Poker Night 1, who they are, and why they're overall great picks in Poker Night 1. Since I'll be talking a lot of the bads of Poker Night 2, I feel like I should stop now and talk about the characters featured in this game, and then afterwards immediately explain why they're kinda... how do I say this? Boring. First, we have Brock Sampson from Venture Bros. Brock is a long-standing bodyguard of the Venture family. Appointed by the Office of Secret Intelligence, he frequently uses his license to kill to protect the Venture family from any threat with sudden and brutal violence. Quite a fun person to invite over for a match of poker, huh? We then have Claptrap from the Borderlands series. He's a general-purpose robot manufactured by Hyperion, and has been programmed with an over-enthusiastic personality that just loves to brag on and on. Think of him as something of a ditto to Max, even though Max is in this game but not one of the people you play against, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Up next is Ash Williams, specifically the version of his character from the film Army of Darkness. Ash is the destroyer of evil deadites that are created by a demonic force that him and his friends release during the Necronomicon. Yeah, quite a lot of weird stuff going around when it comes to this series where he originates from, but in terms of Poker Knight 2, he's pretty much the most charming and friendly out of the 4 characters. And finally, we have Sam from the Devil's Playhouse. A lot of Telltale fans, and heck, many people in general, remember Sam as much as Max in Poker Knight 1. For those who don't get him, Sam has pretty much the same chaotic freelance police tendencies as Max, such as shooting up things and eating junk food, but in a much more calm and in a much more nicer person of the duo. Overall, this cast of characters is good, with nice choices from franchises connected to Telltale, and definitely the type of characters we haven't seen in Telltale before. Now, about what I was about to mention, with the positivity I gave out about the characters just now, you may be wondering, what exactly did I mean when I said in the beginning of the segment that these characters have no chemistry? Well, something not many people mention when it comes to the sequel, but it is something I want to dabble on. I want you to remember the funniest moments from the first game. Think of all the most memorable conversations. When I think of moments like that, I think of Tycho explaining Tetris Attack to Heavy, Heavy praising Strongbad, Max discussing weaponry with Heavy, Tycho asking Max about weird things that happened in Sam Max 204, Strongbad completely bashing Tycho's convention, Strongbad and Max talking about their similarities, and the list goes on and on. Now, what do all of these listed moments have in common? They all complement the game's unique character chemistries. For those who aren't fully experienced with writing, a character chemistry is a writing trait where the writer or writers give certain characters specific and new ways on how to use those characters' interactions with another character. Character chemistries are very, very important traits for crossovers. They matter since they are basically answers to the questions writers make when making certain crossovers. If you think of the question, what would happen if character A met character B, the character chemistry of the two characters would be the answer to it, and show off to the audience what exactly would happen. In Poker Knight 1, the writers made all of the opponents you play against have each specific thoughts and opinions to each other. For example, Tycho is a character in the Penny Arcade comics portrayed as something of an opposite to Gabe, a smart, more calm individual with real interest for his hobbies, with his drawback being kind of a freak on the inside. Poker Knight 1 shows us as the audience what Tycho is like around people that aren't Gabe, trying to sound more impressive with his interests, and occasionally accidentally revealing the weird thoughts of his. This is something known as a social dynamic, a specific way a character interacts with a group of people, or just the general public. When it comes to specifics, Tycho is on good terms with Max, since both of them are comic characters, both particularly talk about one-off scenarios, and also because they happen to be the two of the 3 characters who have unique social dynamics introduced in this game. On the other hand, Tycho isn't fond of Strongbad, because of the fact Strongbad doesn't show much respect to anyone on the table, thinks he is a popular big shot, and just overall being a jerk to both anyone in Tycho's franchise. And of course, we can't mention Tycho's appearance in Poker Knight 1 without talking about his relationship with the game's most popular character, Heavy. For years and years, the moments with Heavy and Tycho have been absolutely loved, both in the community of the games and the communities of the TF2 and Penny Arcade fanbase. Tycho and Heavy's moments boil down to many different things. Whenever Tycho asks Heavy a question regarding his personal life, such as if he has a partner or how it is working as a character in TF2, Heavy usually just mentions what he loves doing, using Sasha, eating sandwiches, killing people, you know, the regular things Heavy does. However, when Heavy asks a question to Tycho, he commonly tries to sound cool like the way he talks with Gabe, which can lead to either Heavy being both impressed and confused, and getting mad at Tycho for talking about a topic that annoys him.
You have woman?
Not with me, no. But yeah, I have woman.
She is pretty.
Yeah, cute, glasses, red hair.
She has the red hair?
No, Heavy. She is not on the other team. You don't have to kill her.
No, but I love the red hair.
Well, you can't have her either. Maybe we can work something out.
These moments are some of the best and most beloved in the game, and it all comes from a single character, and more specifically a character that the fanbase doesn't like as much as the others, which is really impressive to think about. I could go on about Max's, Strombads and Heavy's chemistries, but we have strayed a bit far from Poker 2 enough. Now, what was I just about to mention that's related to what I was saying? Let's see here. Brock, Claptrap, Ash, character chemistry, Tycho, TF2, sandwiches. Alright. Poker 2's cast have no chemistry. Yes, I'm sorry to anyone that happens to be a big fan of Poker 2, but I personally believe that this cast is nowhere near as great because, well, they're boring. And it's all because they were missing the key components of what a great crossover has, and what Poker 2 achieved back in 2010. Don't get me wrong, I like the characters in this game individually, both in this game and their own separate franchises, but as a connected group that talks to each other, aka the main stars of the crossover, they just don't leave much of an impact, including Sam, and he's my favorite video game protagonist ever! All of this could be pointed out the way their conversations work, both how they're executed to flow with the match and the characters' dynamics. I can describe the conversations in Poker 2 as distracting and kind of mindless. Here's an example. There is a conversation where it starts with Sam asking Brock if it was true that Doc Venture starred in a video game. Brock confirms it and says it was kinda bad. Claptrap then mentions how he remembers seeing Brock himself in the Mortal Kombat ripoff, and how he was portrayed as an embarrassing character, and then suddenly plays voice lines from said game with many camera shots showing off the characters and strays away from the match itself. Brock gets a bit stern from being reminded, and then tells them the company who made the game is bankrupt, and for good reason.
What the hell was that?
Now, don't get me wrong, the way it was written was really nice and it's set up well. But you have to remember, the conversations in Poker are about something to break the odd silence of the characters, and something you can listen to while either playing or just regularly sitting down to hear. The characters act exactly like themselves towards each other and don't have their own special thoughts, opinions and ways of interacting with them. And the ways that the camera moves, or the characters make certain expressions for a joke, is just way too distracting and in your face, both if you're just playing regularly or wanting to listen in on what they say. Is it just the way they interact that rubs me the wrong way? It's nowhere near as unique, smart, chill, interesting or timeless compared to the first game. I like the characters of Poker 2, yes, but I don't think they come close to the hilarious and perfectly fanservice moments of Poker 1. I don't know about you, but Claptrap making a joke about dubstep being cool absolutely reeks of early 2010s humor.
You better get used to this sound, Grandpa, because the dub is the only music that survives the great digital event horizon of 2033! Boom!
The gameplay is somehow inferior. Now, the things I've listed about the game so far were pretty much focused on the way the game's world is structured. Sure, I may not like how the inventory is presented in this game, I may not enjoy the characters as much as I do in Poker 1, and I really don't enjoy the way the conversations are executed, but I still wouldn't call the game entirely bad just because of those two disappointing qualities. I mean, the gameplay is just like the first game, and since the last two flaws weren't as bad, that means the magic of the gameplay isn't entirely lost, right? Right? Yeah, I don't like the gameplay of Poker 2 either. But how can that be? It's basically the exact same. How could they mess up something as simple as a game of poker? Well, it's because of two aspects of PN2's gameplay that makes it different from Poker 1. The many additions and changes it brings to the table, and the new and improved AI. What's so bad about these two features? Let me explain by starting off with the elephant in the room. Omaha. More specifically, Omaha Hold'em, the card game. Poker 2 now lets the player choose between two different card games. Texas Hold'em, the card game that the first game was known for, and the brand new Omaha Hold'em. On paper, adding a new additional card game into the mix sounds like a great idea. Being able to pick between two different card games in case a player gets bored of the first one makes it so that the players can keep playing Poker Night 2 with a new experience rather than resorting to find different games to play similarly to Poker Night. However, to me, there's just something off about this edition. Not only is it because it feels a bit too ambitious to add a different card game and a sequel of a Texas Hold'em Hold'em series, but it's also because, well, it doesn't really add anything new besides more replayability. It doesn't activate new interactions, any new dialogue, any new unlockable tables and cards, or anything that deepens the themes and the small plot of Poker Night 2 itself. I think they could have used this entire mode as something really big, considering that Telltale had a bunch of time to work on Poker Night 2. But hey, it's not a completely awful edition, just more of a missed opportunity. Next is the fact that now, instead of the regular $10,000 buy-in and the $50,000 prize pool, it's now doubled to $20,000 and $100,000 respectively. I want to ask, exactly what is the difference between playing with Poker Night 1's buy-in numbers and Poker Night 2's buy-in numbers? The point of the buy-in numbers in Poker Night 1 is that they serve to be specifics of the current balance section in the game's menu. Current balance is pretty much a player's lifetime high score in the game, which can be used to show off to people as bragging rights if you're good or bad at Poker Night. It doesn't really matter if I'm playing with either 10,000 buy-in or 2,000 buy-in. The only change it does to the gameplay is that the player must now remember between how much money they should bet or raise depending on if they're trying to go in a low or high amount, which really barely changes anything at all. Next, we have the brand new addition of buying drinks. In Poker Night 2, with the brand new tokens you collect, you can spend 5 of them to order a drink for one of the characters on the table. What this will do when they drink it is it will increase their chances of showing off tells and make them happen much more oftenly. This is a really stupid concept in my opinion. Like explained earlier, tells are a mechanic used to have an assumption of what an opponent's cards are like. Let me repeat, to have an assumption on what an opponent's cards are like. They can be noticeable if they're bad cards and very subtle if they're good cards. And you also have to keep in mind, no matter what kind of a tell a character would use, it wouldn't be 100% guaranteed. Here, in Poker Night 2, the game encourages you to spend tokens which you're possibly motivated to save enough for special items to spend it on, buying something that will make the chances of their assumptions being raised up. The worst part about all of this is the very fact there is also a chance that the characters might not drink the beverages immediately. This means that you're spending from 5 to 15 tokens at a chance to raise a chance on characters telling you if they have a good chance at winning. It doesn't help out the player, all it does is make the game more complex. What is even worse is the fact that tells themselves are now even more common and even more noticeable. Yes, you've heard that right. Like explained previously, tells themselves have a delicate balance on which kind you notice happening more often than the others. When an opponent has a bad hand, they're more likely to openly express it with a very visible and obvious gesture or movement representing their grief. Fist slamming, checking the cards multiple times, head shaking, etc. These are very clear and obvious indications of bad hands, but are quite rare to see, so don't expect to always see them move like that in the game. The opposite outcome is for when the opponents have good hands, very subtle and hard to notice movements like smirks, nose rubbing, hand twitchings, etc., which are more often to appear but hard to notice. This is what made the tells in Poker Night 1 had such a balanced and unique feature. However, for Poker Night 2, they happen almost all the time. Not only do they have the same frequency, but the animations and movements used for specific tells are now literally on the same base level. What I mean by that is that literally all of the tells, whether good or bad, are now all easily noticeable. For example, if Sam has a bad hand, he'll place his chin on the table like a dog. If Sam has a good hand, his hat will spring up into the air in excitement. You see a pattern in these two tells? They are both described to be very noticeable things that happen in the middle of the round. Not only does this make the tells much less unique and balanced, but with them becoming much more common and easier to spot, this pretty much makes the previously mentioned drink mechanic entirely obsolete. Because if you think that I as a player would like to increase the frequency of a feature that happens almost all the time and is easily detectable, you're pretty much messed up on what makes game design good. One last thing I would like to mention before moving on to the game's AI is the few quality of life changes that are missing. There are a few that are worth listing, but for today I would just like to list 2 of them. You can't change the difficulty, and you can't skip any dialogue with right click. Do I even need to explain why this is frustrating? 3 words. Repetition, distraction, annoyance. Now, all of these things I have listed are only the brand new additions to the game which I didn't like. They weren't the entire gameplay. And all they did when it comes to affecting the overall game design was just making unnecessary changes that either didn't deepen the game like they were supposed to, or just made the experience worse. Omaha wasn't really a great addition since you had to learn an entire new game to play it. The money increase barely did anything. The drink system is ridiculously designed and obsolete thanks to the tells being much more common and noticeable, and the many quality of life changes were also all pointless, yeah. But if you ask me, the worst part of Poker Night 2's gameplay is its brand new enhanced AI. You see, for Poker Night 2, Telltale Games decided to enhance, expand and modify the opponent AI programming for the game to give its own unique gameplay feel. They wanted to have the players have a similar experience by keeping the same skill and aggression based style of opponent mindsets, while at the same time making them play much more differently than the people you'd meet in Poker Night 1. Now, this does make sense, considering that the plot is about us, the player, coming back to the inventory after some time and meeting new people that would surely have different playstyles of poker. But plot-related connection aside, I must say, the AI in Poker Night 2 is completely unbalanced. What I mean by that is that when playing, almost all of the time, the opponent will either be so easy to beat or so frustrating to deal with to the point where you can't even call or raise your bet once. In Poker Night 1, you have two difficulty choices, normal and hard. In normal mode, the opponents will have their AI skills set standardly. They will often play carefully and not so aggressively so that they don't overwhelm the player with difficulty, all the while still having their unique character play traits visible and noticeable during the match. In short, Poker Night 1's normal mode is basically easy mode, made for people who have almost no experience in poker, or any experience in poker at all, while still putting up a bit of a fight. On the other hand, hard mode is a difficulty Telltale themselves recommend playing the game in, where it is a difficulty that basically takes up the training wheels of a player's experience and lets them experience the way the game was truly meant to be played, with the opponents having different intelligence and aggression values that truly test the player's understanding of the game, the player's choices with their assigned cards, and the player's overall poker skills to the maximum. When you play Poker Night 1 on hard, you never know what could happen next. One round you might get great cards but only get to collect the opponent's blinds, and another round you might be confident in your cards, only to lose to a showdown against someone else getting a 3 of a kind. The word I could describe the gameplay of Poker Night 1 is mercurical. Yeah, quite a big intellectual word, but it makes sense in hindsight. Hard mode just feels like the right amount of luck-based challenge intended for a poker card game like this, having the perfect balance and in-between of rounds where you can easily make everyone fold, and rounds where the stakes are at their highest and a single card kicker can make a huge difference to the outcome of the match. So the verdict is, Poker Night 1 is a tightly designed card game, with unpredictable outcomes of every round, whether it be easy to handle or a tough challenge to overcome, all the while staying at a certain middle point throughout all of it. Poker Night 2 doesn't have that middle point. For whatever reason, the way the game was programmed with the intention of making it more smarter, Telltale Games somehow made the game's difficulty extremely unbalanced, and I have no idea why it was made like this. Most common rounds you see in Poker Night 2 are the ones where the opponents are so idle-minded that they give you all of their money after a simple bluff, or the ones where the opponents know literally everything about your cards and hand to the point where they steamroll you like a pancake in only 3 turns. And it's just so confusing to me how something like this was tested, produced and shipped in an unbalanced state like this. Poker Night 2, despite being similarly developed, is just so unfun to play. All because it feels like there is no midpoint to the game that makes it have an actual consistent pace with itself. The AI programming of Poker Night 2 was actually so bad that years later, people would go on to trash on the game's programming and how badly balanced it was, with many people mentioning how the game was either cheating and making everything feel rigged, and some people mentioning how you could easily bluff everyone away and steal their money. To which the programmers of the game had to respond and defend the game's AI and how it isn't actually unbalanced at all. This whole fiasco is just sad. Sure, Poker Night 1 also didn't have perfect AI, and it also didn't have the best programming of any game ever, but it was actually solid, fair and balanced with consistency. Poker Night 2 on the other hand, it's so bad with its programming that it technically got an F on its computer science test. The rewards kinda suck now. Hey everybody! Remember those cool items you could collect in Poker Night 1 that were fun to get and also gave you free items in Team Fortress 2? Well, guess what, fellow ladies and gents? Our favorite drunkenly rock-bottom uncle of the Telltale sequel party has screwed that up as well! Everyone give your applause to Poker Night 2 one more time! Okay. In all seriousness, Poker Night 2 is also guilty of making a very known feature from the previous installment inferior in almost every way. Poker Night 2 introduced a brand new bounty system, which gave the player 3 different challenges that could be completed during the match of both Texas Hold'em and Omaha. When a player completes all 3 challenges, instead of being rewarded with something, the player gets to have a chance at unlocking a new collectible items from specific opponents, which they can obtain by winning the tournament. Once winning the tournament, the player finally obtains the item until they get to do another 3 challenges and repeat the entire process until getting all 5 new items. This sounds like a really great system on paper. Giving the players some challenges to do and focusing on beating them to have a chance to unlock an exclusive item for replayability is something that would definitely make people come back to the game over and over again for more, to the point where they would play the game so much that they want to keep playing, even if they have unlocked all the items in the game. However, just like everything I have listed previously, Poker Night 1 does this much better, and all in a simpler way. First of all, I like to ask, couldn't the challenges have been used for something else? I think that the challenges could have been perfect if they instead rewarded you with tokens, since it could not only be a helping hand for people who want to collect all the unlockable skins, but also because of the previously mentioned drink system, and how giving the players another means to earn tokens makes it feel like they won't be wasting tokens intending for unlocking skins to be used on some pointless feature for tells, and further incentivizing the players to do as many things during the game as possible. Secondly, in Poker Night 1, all you needed to do to have a chance at winning the item was start a new tournament and wait for one of the opponents to randomly select out their buy-in, which was simple and quick to the point. Why is it that in Poker Night 2 we only get to have a chance at winning at a collectible item only after doing challenges? It makes no sense to me. The way it was in Poker Night 1 seemed fine enough. The challenge about it was that you, the player, had to beat the opponent who gave up the buy-in item before someone else on the table does it. So even if the opponents would regularly put in their special buy-in item, you still had to overcome the fact that you weren't guaranteed to win it in that very round. It was all about how you would approach the situation, knowing that you could either win or lose an exclusive item. Here, in Poker Night 2, you have nothing to worry about, which loses that special feeling of having a chance to win something cool. Once you win all 3 challenges of the bounty system, every single tournament you start will have one of the characters put up their buy-in item naturally like it's nothing to scoff at. And quick question, am I the only one who liked the concept of the buy-in items in Poker Night 1 serving as a money alternative to opponents because they had no money in that night? It felt real and built the world really well. Finally, third of all, why do we have to win the entire tournament to get the item? In Poker Night 1, all you had to do was beat the opponent who put up their buy-in item, and you win it right there and then. It makes sense in both terms of game design and pure logic. You earn an item that you get from someone else when they lose. I literally do not see why they changed it so that you receive prizes only after the tournament, other than some concerns that the players who were playing Poker Night 2 for the Team Fortress items just wanted to get them and possibly never play the game again. But even if that was the reason, it would still feel really stupid to not only lock people out of their time to unlock a collectible item, but also just make the experience worse and less challenging for everyone. One last thing before going, I think that the items you unlock from Poker Night 2 aren't that great. I always wondered why many people didn't talk about the TF2 Poker Night 2 items. When looking at them, you can see why. The only one I feel like is worth it is the Bloodhound, referencing Sam's hat. And let's not forget about the other 3 things you unlocked. The Borderlands 2 items were kinda cool, the Xbox 360 avatar items are the best, and the PS3 themes, while cool, shouldn't have been rewards and just instead downloadables for PSN. Wait, PS3? Xbox? Oh right, I almost forgot. Poker Night 2's console ports are horrendous. Out of all things I do not like about Poker Night 2, the lack of expanding the universe, the inferiorly written characters, the pointless gameplay changes, and the way worse item system, all of them do not compare to the fact that, for some reason, Poker Night 2 released on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. You see, back in early 2010, Telltale were really interested in bringing their games to consoles to expand their audience by covering as many console territories as they can. They first did this with the Devil's Playhouse on PS3, which was a really big hit on the PlayStation Store at the time of its release. Soon after, Telltale would release some other games on their consoles, such as Sam Max 1 and 2 ports on Xbox and Wii, Strombody's Cool Game on PSN, Tales of Monkey Island on PSN and Wii, Wallace and Gromit, Back to the Future, etc. Telltale hit it especially big with The Walking Dead Season 1, which was not only a great and popular game at the time, but it was around the time when Telltale became super popular, so the newest and most trendy game being available on other platforms worked well for them. However, here is one reason why these games worked on consoles, both the golden era games and the modern era ones. Story-related games were really big at the time. Even though Telltale's games required intelligence for puzzle solving, logical thinking, clue examining, and overall expecting the player to think outside the box, these games' structures made them work so well for console players who want to experience stories they haven't seen before, whether they were focused on their narratives or their comedy. That's why, back in 2010 and onwards, a game like Poker Night 1 wasn't released on consoles, even with Telltale dipping their toes in the console space around the time. It was because, obviously, a single-player only card game which was reliant on replayability just didn't work for consoles well. Why would you keep booting up to play Poker Night 1 on your PS3 if you could just keep replaying something with actual more replayability content and actual online multiplayer features like Little Big Planet and Killzone 2. It made perfect sense why the game only came out on PC. Pokénight 1 worked on computers, and only computers. So tell me, who came up with the idea of Pokénight 2 on consoles? I'm sorry, but this game does not work at all on systems other than the PC. Not only did I mention that a single player only card game reliant on replayability doesn't work on a console space because of its lack of online play, but it's also because, well, my goodness, this game is just not optimized well for consoles. It runs on a really choppy frame rate at a low resolution, it has long loading times, sudden freeze frames during gameplay that happen after every new hand, missing voice lines, more bugs than the PC version, and it's just overall not built well enough at all. I'm kind of shocked that these ports were released in the state that they're in. Pokénight 2 on PS3 and Xbox is just entirely buggy, janky, and a reason why games like it shouldn't have been put on more places than the PC. The only thing they have worth going for it is their exclusive items, but I already expressed before that the Xbox items were cool, the PS3 items should have been free, and that both of these item sets should have been marketplace items, instead of being entirely locked behind the bounty system. I would mention the iOS version, but this part of the game was less known, has been delisted for quite some time, and there doesn't seem to be much to talk about besides some obvious visual downgrades. And just like that, all 5 of these major reasons are why I, personally, think Pokénight 2 is a much worse game than Pokénight 1. Now, I get that all of this seemed like a rant dumping rather than a proper retrospective and non-biased look at the game, but you have to understand why I talk like this. To this day, in 2024, people all widely agree that Pokénight 2 is nowhere near as good as the first game. A lot of news articles listing the game really low on Telltale game rankings, and fans of the series overall not thinking about the game as much despite the many new things it brought to the table, and the fact that it has a whole truckload of new content. But here's the thing. Despite everyone agreeing about that opinion, not many people talk about why Pokénight 2 feels so much worse than the original game, aside from the fact it didn't have much funny dialogue. It's all probably because, well, people don't play the Pokénight games to find everything what's good and what's bad about them. The whole appeal of Pokénight 1 and 2 as a game are their crossover characters. People love crossovers. Crossovers themselves are cool concepts, because they get to execute many different original ideas, and bring many different people from different communities together to have fun while watching their favorite characters interact. That's why, for an example, the Sam Max and Homestar Runner community are friendly to each other. That's why many people who play TF2 know about Penny Arcade and Tycho himself. That's why all of us who played the Pokénight games know all about these characters who appear and the franchise they come from. People don't really focus on the game's design because that's not the most important part of enjoying it. That is completely fine. But, in my eyes, with people easily neglecting Pokénight 2 because of its less memorable writing, it gave me the chance to exactly look back on the game with a different perspective and see why it truly isn't talked about so much. Before I played it, Pokénight 2, to me, just felt like the first game but with new characters, which seems like a fine enough idea for a sequel to a game like this, considering that's pretty much what all fans wanted for a sequel to Pokénight back in 2010. But with what Telltale themselves wanted to do with the series, they decided to take a new approach, and in return, we as an audience and critics should talk and express our opinions on these new changes, whether we care about one game aspect over the other. And because of that, sadly, I have to give out my honest opinion about these Pokénight 2 changes. They're not good. I do not like the new changes of Pokénight 2, which is really something that bums me out because, in all honesty, despite all of my criticism about Pokénight 2 and how it tried to be a better game and sequel, I can still call it a good game. I can still enjoy some of its funny moments, I can still enjoy some of their overly ambitious moments that break the mood and pace of the game, and I can still recommend this game to fans of the franchises which are represented in it, and to any Telltale fan in general. But even with that, I still feel like it's the right call to talk about this game's failures at trying to spice things up. And that's because I love Pokénight, and I love Telltale. And to love stuff like Pokénight is to point out its flaws, like any video game ever. Why is it that all of these flaws matter more than the good aspects of the game that should matter instead? Well, it's because in reality, without any of these new unnecessary changes and flaws, Pokénight 2 is exactly like Pokénight 1. And there is nothing wrong about that. Heck, Pokénight 1 is exactly like Telltale Texas Hold'em. But the reason why that game got easily overshadowed by Pokénight 1 was because of the new concepts, ideas, and overall changes that Pokénight 1 brought to the table. These flaws of Pokemon 2 matter because they were supposed to be the things that made the game stick out from its predecessors, and why you, as a player, would rather choose to play it rather than the earlier titles. But instead, they were the reason why the game was lesser known and loved. The very reason why Pokemon 2 failed was because it didn't hit the nail on the head when it came to being a follow-up to a very unique game like Pokemon 1, which in return made its only non-flawed parts closer to the style of quality of the first game. But because of that, we are only stuck in this deep hole where, no matter if we're complimenting the game for still being Pokemon, and no matter if we're criticizing it for trying too hard with its new changes, we are just stuck there with a pretty messy game where we can't decide whether we like or not. Pokemon 2 is possibly Telltale's biggest enigma. It's supposed to be better than the first game when it comes to being a game, but because it failed at that, it's only now as good, if not a bit less good than Pokemon 1. Which makes it much worse considering that since it's a sequel, those changes were supposed to matter because that's what makes a sequel a sequel. I could go on, but to summarize, I have quite a rocky relationship with Pokemon 2. It's a good game, it isn't bad, and it can make me happy. But it can make me laugh, feel impressed, or feel like I'm having fun. It will forever be Telltale's biggest enigma. Fun fact, deep in the code of Pokemon 2, you can see that two characters who are nowhere to be seen in the game were supposed to be one of the opponents in the game, the two characters of which being the blue medic from Team Fortress 2 and Larry from The Walking Dead. Medic was supposed to be in the game until being cut and replaced by Sam, and Larry had a good amount of progress on him being added until he got scrapped too and replaced by Brock Sampson. Really interesting. Well, here we are now. We have covered all three of Telltale's Texas Hold'em games, looked back on what they bring to the audience when it came to being a unique indie card game, and explored exactly why its first installment was a way too simple yet overtly charming piece of history, why its second and most iconic installment is one of the best games of its time, and why its sequel and third installment, while objectively good, failed to deliver anything new aside from a new setting that was inferior to the second installment. To be honest, despite me not being so fond of Pokemon 2, and despite it coming out past the Walking Dead Season 1 era of Telltale, I'm very confident in saying that it's Telltale's second best series to come from their golden era. Sam & Max obviously being number one spot. Now don't get me wrong, Pokemon is nowhere near as good of a series and game as something like Strong Bad, Tales of Monkey Island and Back to the Future. But since it was one of the only few Telltale series at the time which had sequels, minus stuff like the Bone Duology, Puzzle Agent or any other non-episodic point and clicks, I can confidently say that this series is one of Telltale's best. When it came to Telltale and their games, things that made each game stand on its own and seem unique were both how Telltale were able to manage and make a story out of an IP, and what kind of special gameplay features it would have. Even though Pokemon didn't exactly have special gameplay features aside from the unique way each character was programmed, it was able to stand out above the rest with the very fact that Telltale writers were able to just make such great crossovers with characters while making them all pinpoint accurate from the series they come from, including with stuff like their different chemistries and many references they make about their respective series. It's because of all of these combinations of amazing and creative things the developers were able to create with this outstandingly imaginative idea by Dan Connors that makes Pokemon a timeless internet classic. Despite its flaws, I'm happy that it exists, because it proves that not only are crossovers really cool concepts, not only are Telltale the best when it comes to pairing characters from different franchises together, but most importantly that, without these games, most of us wouldn't have known about some of our favorite franchises, and without them, we probably wouldn't have been here to this day. In October of 2018, Telltale Games shut down its doors due to filing for bankruptcy after many strings of games that left fans disappointed due to its lack of creativity and experimenting with the new Telltale formula. Because of the shutdown, many Telltale games were taken off online marketplaces due to not being able to be sold anymore. Games of which included Strong Bad, Monkey Island, Wallace and Gromit, Back to the Future, Bone, Minecraft Story Mode, Sam & Max, and of course Pokemon 1 and 2. There was something interesting when it came to Pokemon being taken off Steam. Pokemon 1 and 2 were taken down in September of 2018, a month before the company's bankruptcy. Why exactly was this the case? Well, here's a good enough explanation to those who don't know. You see, when video game companies are making games based off existing franchises, they obviously cannot just use the characters, assets and other concepts from them so easily. What they need is a license. Having a license means that the game developers have legally obtained intellectual property owners' permission to use their properties for their games. Hence why people like Max, Strongbad, Heavy, Tycho and the others were able to be used in the game for the crossover. But here's the catch. This permission doesn't last forever. To keep selling the game, the company has to pay for the license again and again, because the licensing is the main way property owners are able to make money from the games they allow their characters to be used in. If they don't, well, the game gets removed and no one can buy it anymore. That's why you might see some games disappear after a few years, probably because they couldn't keep certain characters, certain music or graphics, or any content related to a property they don't own anymore. It's the reason why Smash Bros. Doesn't exactly have all the characters we want to see. It's the reason why you see some games being taken off online markets before the console they released on even retired. And most importantly, it's the reason why you can't buy Poker 1 and 2 anymore. Compared to every other game Telltale would make, all they needed was to pay the rights and licenses to a single property owner, and the rest is easy peasy. But since Poker 1 and 2 are games with multiple different franchises appearing at once, Telltale has to pay at least 4 to 6 licenses just to keep these games up on the market. All the while they cost a small sum of $5 or $7.20 adjusted for inflation. Because of this, Telltale possibly couldn't have been able to keep the games up due to the high amounts of money they needed to pay to the property owners. Especially with the low prices of the games forcing them to use some of the profits from their other games just to keep these games up. And because these games were out for an entire 8 years, Telltale pretty much either had to pay up the licenses 9 times if they were paying yearly, or an even astonishing 96 times if they were paying monthly. Count that alongside the average price for licensing popular icons like Max, Heavy and Strongbad, and Telltale pretty much had to pay $100,000 for every time they had to renew the license. All for Poker 1 alone, without even counting Poker 2. And just to show off how exactly a straw can break a camel's back, if we had to calculate the total amount of money they had to spend on keeping Poker 1 from 2010 to 2018, Telltale would either have had to pay $900,000 or $9,600,000 monthly. My goodness! I am aware that all of this isn't 100% correct, especially the idea of Telltale paying the license every month. I'm sure that something like that would be absurd. But I am putting this in perspective to show you that this blunder of having to pay to keep Poker 1 and 2 up was either a bit less or much more harder and expensive than when presented. And is probably the reason why we won't ever see Poker 1 and 2 up online for purchase anytime soon. Or possibly even ever. And that really does suck considering how much of an impact this tiny series made to both Telltale and internet culture as a whole. It brought so many different communities together to learn more about their franchises, literally everyone getting a good amount of fan service for each appearance. Telltale clearly put their hearts into the Poker series despite its flaws, and we owe them for everything they have accomplished with it. In the end, Poker The Inventory was a special series that united diverse gaming communities and showcased Telltale's dedication to creating something unique. Although licensing challenges have likely kept these games from being available today, their legacy lives on into the memories of fans who experienced them. It will forever be remembered, loved, and appreciated for being one of the most surreal, chilling, and unique video games I ever played in my life.